So what's interesting is this. I don't want to start with an anecdotal story, but when you go to Japanese universities, it's not uncommon to see Indian students who are studying at Japanese universities. And what happens is that they get educated under the Japanese university system. If they want a job in Japan, essentially they can get any job that they want, because the Japanese companies really do appreciate the fact not only that they have the skills that are required, but also the cultural familiarity and the respect that a lot of Japanese companies and Japanese businesses require from its workers. So those who go from India to Japan, if you're looking for a high-paying job, a highly skilled job, I think going to Japan is actually a really good idea. But here's the question. Is Japan, is Korea, is Taiwan prepared to accept workers who may not necessarily be culturally familiar or linguistically fluent in the country of origin, in those respective countries, but nevertheless accept Indian workers, whatever industry they may be in? Right now, the demographic situation is such that really they have no choice. The Japanese, the Koreans, and Taiwanese have no choice but to accept them. But that's not good enough. What they really need to do is to roll out the red carpet, welcome those Indian workers who are going to be very hardworking. They may not necessarily be fluent in that East Asian language, but if they're willing to learn, and importantly, to understand the business culture and to work within that framework, I believe that the Indian workers have a great deal of potential, and they will certainly be welcomed in those countries.
Thank you for joining Shihoko. I really appreciate that. When you think of India in the eyes of the world, what are the 2 or 3 words that jump to your mind?
Great potential, dynamic, but also with some problems.
Okay. And when you think of Mr. Modi as a person and as a prime minister, what are the 2 or 3 words that jump to your mind?
Strong leader, Hindu nationalism, divisive, polarizing figure.
Okay, thank you. Now, in your view, how has Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy strategy enhanced or redefined India's strategic autonomy, on which I talked a lot with Michael Kugelman, the concept of strategic autonomy, especially in the context of its relations with major powers like the United States, China, and Russia?
What Prime Minister Modi has done is to be able to leverage a lot of the expectations that the world has for India. So from an economic perspective, India has tremendous potential because of its sheer size. because of its investments in technology, its ability to lead when it comes to the certain pharmaceutical industries and the like. So as a consumer, as an innovator, and its geographic location, there's a tremendous opportunity and optimism when it comes to India. And what Prime Minister Modi has done is to be able to make good use of that. And so when we look at trade relations that India has been involved in, we see that the world essentially is courting India. That there is a recognition that without India, not just the regional trading system, but indeed the global economy is poorer for it. So there is a great deal of impetus to include India into these trade frameworks and into the global international economic order.
Now, you specialize in trade and economic interests across the Indo-Pacific. Considering the strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region, how do you assess India's role and its initiatives in promoting regional security, stability, and economic cooperation, especially through platforms like the Quad?
Right. So, of course, the Quad was not initially an economic mechanism. It wasn't even a defense strategy. It was really to deal with the immediate natural disaster. And the Quad has since then taken on a different role. And the role that it has now is much more focused on reassessing the regional order and to have strengthening of relations between like-minded countries. Many would argue that India is actually the weakest link amongst the four countries. And so that the United States, Australia, and Japan are much more in alignment when it comes to their security and economic interests, and they're prepared also to work more closely together than India. That said, the need to keep India involved are tremendous, and there is great recognition amongst the three other Quad member countries that to not have India in the fold is not an option. And there is this tremendous effort to accommodate a great deal of what India is concerned about, and especially what the Modi government is focused on, and to be able to adapt according to India's current needs.
Now, your expertise also covers Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. India has had close political, economic, and security partnership with these countries. How seriously is India taken by these countries?
I think when we talk about things that are of great concern to these countries, they are Japan, Korea, Taiwan are at the heart of technology, innovation, and also at the heart of technology competition as well. There is an understanding that India has a tremendous role to play as a provider of some of the supply chain resiliency when it comes not just to semiconductors, but also in other IT sectors as well. And again, when we start talking about economic security, it's not simply limited to the information technology sector. It is about healthcare. It is about materials. It is also about workforce. And India has a tremendously educated workforce, a very ambitious workforce as well. And there is a great deal of appetite on the part of Japan, on Korea, and Taiwan to tap into that market and the dynamism and the ability of the Indian workforce to be more integrated and to seek new opportunities outside of its own borders as well. I do want to say there is tremendous respect for India, both at the national level and also at the grassroots level. When we look, for instance, at Japan, Japan really was the initiator of this idea of an Indo-Pacific, the confluence of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Where did he launch that? He launched it before the Indian Parliament during his first administration. That has really become not just a concept that Japan has embraced as its de facto grand strategy, but it has become an adopted idea of the United States, of European countries, as well as across the region as well. The fact that it's called Indo-Pacific, I am aware that there is a lot of concern in India that it does, is it really an Indo-Pacific strategy when India is a bit ambivalent about its own role. But from the outside, looking at the Indo-Pacific strategy, we know by its name alone that India has this critical role to play, and we cannot afford to alienate or to not work closely together with India.
Now, you talked about the competitive advantage of the Indian workforce being young, skilled, multilingual, and so on. Now, we also see aging population across the West and even in the Asian countries such as Japan, Taiwan, and of late even in China. So moving forward, these countries, do you think, will be able to overcome the insularity as far as their cultural openness is concerned and embrace foreign labor, such as the Indian workers?
Yeah. So what's interesting is this. I don't want to start with an anecdotal story, but when you go to Japanese universities, it's not uncommon to see Indian students who are studying at Japanese universities. And what happens is that they get educated under the Japanese university system. If they want a job in Japan, essentially they can get any job that they want, because the Japanese companies really do appreciate the fact not only that they have the skills that are required, but also the cultural familiarity and the respect that a lot of Japanese companies and Japanese businesses require from its workers. So those who go from India to Japan, if you're looking for a high-paying job, a highly skilled job, I think going to Japan is actually a really good idea. But here's the question. Is Japan, is Korea, is Taiwan prepared to accept workers who may not necessarily be culturally familiar or linguistically fluent in the country of origin, in those respective countries, but nevertheless accept Indian workers, whatever industry they may be in? Right now, the demographic situation is such that really they have no choice. The Japanese, the Koreans, and Taiwanese have no choice but to accept them. But that's not good enough. What they really need to do is to roll out the red carpet, welcome those Indian workers who are going to be very hardworking. They may not necessarily be fluent in that East Asian language, but if they're willing to learn, and importantly, to understand the business culture and to work within that framework, I believe that the Indian workers have a great deal of potential, and they will certainly be welcomed in those countries. Okay. They have a lot of choices. I mean, they can go to Australia, they can go to Canada. They're very highly sought after right now. It's a seller's market.
Right. Now, but one of the concerns with regard to the usage of Indian labor is that in some countries they are being used in the war zone and put in a harm's way. For example, in Israel, and Taiwan might use it to boost its defense force, or any other country, for example.
In a nutshell, no, because right now, none of these East Asian countries are actually engaged in active warfare. And so there is no need for a mercenary force. There is no need for active troops. And of course, the nature of warfare has changed a great deal. It's very technology dependent, and there may be need for greater information technology based workers, whether it's on the defense side or defense equipment manufacturing side. But it won't be this because these countries are not involved in active war, they're not going to be deployed in these areas as well. And I should say that in the case of Japan, there is great hesitancy for Japan to actually be engaged in war. So I'm not particularly concerned about Indian workers being inadvertently roped into a war.
Okay. All right. Now, when it comes to competitive positioning and rivalry, the established leader won't give way easily, right? You have to fight for your place and take that position, and you can see
Right.
that competitive rivalry, unfolding, with the U.S. and China already,
Right.
and India expected to be.
Yeah.
How do you see the strategic economic positioning of India in relation to US and China?
So we can measure the standing of a country economically through GDP, and we can rank India. Is it going to be number 3? Is it going to be number 4? And that's a source of great pride, and that's also going to be a source of tension. But when we talk about economic prospects, it's also about living standards and what the economy means to your average voter back at home. India has tremendous potential, but at the same time, there is a great deal of income inequality and unequal distribution of wealth as well. There is a great deal of potential to address those challenges. There is a great deal of opportunity to really propel India's domestic economy. If India is able to really leverage the potential that it has so that there is all boats across India actually rise, that sends a tremendous signal about what it means to be a successful country. It's not just about GDP. It is about higher living standards across the board. All of a sudden, if you're seeing more people actually going to India for business opportunities, you're seeing more people going to India to look for employment opportunities, then what is a better way than to demonstrate India's real, lasting economic strength and economic allure? We talk about China, right? And China is, yes, the second largest economy. It's showing signs of weakness, but it is still weak. But there is not a lot of migration from the West to go to China to seek new opportunities. Maybe there's obviously going to be business opportunities, but it's not really this whole mass of people going to China to look for new opportunities to work. That is still, and the weakness of the Chinese economy is exactly that it is not seen to provide great opportunities for the largest amount of people. I think the challenge for India is to be able to deliver on that. And when we look, for instance, in the 80s, 90s, we talked about the Asian tigers, right? The Asian tigers, that is to say Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, these countries and governments. What they were successful in doing are a number of issues. One is having successful industrial policy, having successful, and the United States and other countries would argue, well, it was protectionism too. That is indeed the case, but it was also a strategic investment in key industries that really elevated their economic growth trajectory. India has the potential and is actually doing that kind of strategic industrial investment. We're going to see much more of that coming through. The other part of the Asian tiger success story is that it did lead to higher education, higher incomes, higher standards of living. And that became very aspirational for across the Indo-Pacific region. And I think we still see that. So that's really, to me, the key for India's success moving forward.
All right. Let's continue our discussion on competitive strategy, because that's one of the subjects I teach in my class as well. Okay. Now, you look at India and China, on paper, there is tremendous synergy. And the
Yeah.
leaders of both the countries talked about it when they were good friends until the border issue flared up. On paper, it looks that the manufacturing hardware capability of China and the services software capability of India, if they can gel well, they can dominate the world. But it's not really, come to fruition. Why?
Well, if we look at trade agreements, right? So there is a trade agreement between the 10 ASEAN countries and several key Asian countries, which should have included India, but India dropped out at the last minute because it was concerned about being absorbed essentially and not being able to compete with China, and that the Chinese economy, Chinese exports would dominate India. So there is that concern that too much integration with India, it is a natural fit. It can be very complementary, but at the same time, there is a lot of concern, especially in this Modi government, about protecting even some of the weaker industries of India as well. So there are strengths to the Indian economy. There are strengths to all economies worldwide, but with strengths come weaknesses. And right now, India does want to protect its weak industries as well as its strong ones. And if there is closer economic cooperation or enhanced trade relations where there is a lower tariff barrier or greater market access, then the Indian concern is that it would be overrun essentially by China. So that's where the competition is. The other issue is this. I talked at the beginning about the tremendous respect that the three other Quad countries have for India. I don't think China would have that kind of respect. China's tradition has been very much a feudal system where China is on top and the other countries are more submissive to the Chinese hierarchy. I don't think the Indians are prepared to accept that kind of relationship with China. If India wants to be in a partnership, they want to be the meeting of two equals. That's always going to be a challenge with China. And so even if economically it was a pragmatic thing to do, which I don't think it is, from a political perspective, it would be seen as a sign of weakness on the part of the Indian government.
Okay. Now, just yesterday, India signed a free trade agreement with the European Economic Federation, if I'm not mistaken. And there is a talk that with UK, Australia, and other countries, the negotiations for the free trade agreement will accelerate and be finalized pretty soon. Now, when it comes to these kind of economic agreements, whether it is with ASEAN or North American Atlantic Treaty Organization or whatever, when it comes to that, how much of that is driven by economic interest, and how much of that is driven by cultural closeness, or historical friendliness?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It is said that closer trade relations are a prerequisite for greater political cooperation. And so if the first part of any official alliance or any real coordinated effort for security relations has to first of all start with closer economic relations. So this closer trade ties with India on the part of the Europeans in terms of real GDP contribution may not be that tremendous, but it does open a gateway for regular dialogue. It does open the gateway to have ministerial level meetings and to have negotiations. And that is key, fundamental to building trust between the two sides. So there is that potential, even if it's not so obvious. They're not strategic rivals when it comes to on the economic side, but it does open up this opportunity for regular communication with an eye towards looking for other areas of mutual interest and concern. And I think that is also going to lead into to what extent do they share concerns about China.
Okay. Now, China's Belt and Road Initiative is now 10 years old. And, the other countries, for example, there is now India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. How does that stack against the China's Belt and Road Initiative? Because these initiatives have big impact on the neighboring countries, particularly in the South Asian region, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, you name it. So they not only have economic implication, but also political and security implications. So going forward, how do you see this India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor?
I think it provides an opportunity to think about de-risking from China in a nutshell. That we have this system in place where there is an assumption that China has to be part of supply chain resilience, that it has to be an integral part when we talk about overseas investments and opportunities. China is going to be part of that. Now, when we start thinking about new ways, new partnerships that is outside of the region, that gives us an opportunity to think about hedging risks. It also gives us an opportunity to think about potential partners that we could lean towards in times of disruption and dislocation. And that's not necessarily just because of economic circumstances. We've seen from the pandemic, disruptions, dislocations happen because of natural disasters and the like. And just natural disasters can always happen, and it doesn't have to be a health issue. It can be any kind of disruptive factor. What I'm excited about is that there is a global effort to reimagine more broadly the economic order and to hedge against China leveraging its economic might. So we have a great deal of discussion about economic statecraft. China has been quite good at leveraging its economic might for political purposes. And that has come through things, positive, like the Belt and Road Initiative. But it can also be negative in the form of economic coercive action. Whether it's carrots or sticks, positive or negative, we do know that China is very willing to use economic statecraft. And to mitigate from that risk, countries like India need to find partners and to be able to look towards other, not just neighboring countries, but other regions where it can actually be able to hedge against the Chinese economic statecraft efforts.
As you just now alluded to, we cannot look at economic aspects of a nation by ignoring the political, social, cultural aspects along with it. For example, U.S. has been in competitive rivalry with China, but it's not been able to, reduce its supply chain dependence, border with China, but its trade imbalance is still growing. And so going forward, how can these countries de-risk themselves from China on a longer footing?
Right. Well, the popular approach to this is the China plus one strategy. And what does that mean? We're not pulling out of China altogether. We're not even not investing in China anymore. It's just not investing as much, not expecting as much, going into China with their eyes wide open, and also finding that plus one, the other country or countries that may be an alternative to China. Now, this is a great opportunity for India because it does become part of that China plus one strategy. I would also argue that India has become its own destination unto itself. So this is the opportunity for India to really shine. But what we are seeing is a hesitancy to put too many eggs into the China basket. And quite frankly, China has made it a lot easier for countries as well as private companies to make that decision. I know, for instance, Japanese corporate executives are quite wary of going to China right now because they may be able to enter, but there may be problems leaving the country because they may be detained because of whatever economic security concern or charges of espionage or whatever, whether they are true or not. There's a lot of concern on the part of individual executives, which in turn changes the policy of companies. And this is seen not just from Japanese companies, but from other across the world right now. US companies are facing similar issues. And you see that right now. For instance, there used to be a lot of direct flights from Washington to Beijing. That's really been reduced. The price of going from the United States to China has risen astronomically because it's so costly. Flights to India are increasing. So there's a lot of appetite, which you can actually see from things like flights, the actual people going to India right now. And it's not just the other way, it's both ways. From India to the United States, from India to Asia, from India to the world, but also the other way. The world is going to India right now. And there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of momentum. But again, as I said at the beginning, there are risks and concerns about India too.
It's very interesting to look at economic activity through the frequency of flights to and from. That's really
Yeah. It's an easy way to look at it, right?
look at it.
But in a way, it's more telling than like just cargo volume. So yeah.
Okay. Now I'll come to the concluding questions. In terms of the international image of India, and particularly if you look at the soft power that it wields,
Mhm.
from snake charmer to IT search to Chandrayaan 3 landing on the south pole of the moon, India has come a long way in the eyes of the world. So, in your own experience, how has the worldview of India changed?
I think India's come quite a long way from the snake charming type of era. When we think India, we think a youthful population, a population that is willing to take risks and go overseas, not just for educational opportunities, but also for employment opportunities. The most successful diaspora in the United States is the Indian population here. We see that across, not just in the United States, but also in Asia as well. I know for a fact that some of the most highly visible and dynamic migrant workers in Japan are actually from India. And it used to be that they would open restaurants, right? But now they are very much sought after in the IT industry. And they are seen as that the driving force of STEM research and innovation. But I do know that when we look at the political landscape in the United States, Indian Americans are highly verbal. They're highly articulate. They also play a tremendous political role as well. So we're seeing greater influence and impact of Indians outside of their own country, not just in the sciences, not just in, like it used to be like 10 years ago, like call centers were in India. That's no longer. We're really talking about high-end advanced technology, but they're not just workers. They're actually the CEOs. They are the ones who are making the legislation. They are calling the shots. And we also see a lot of women, Indian women, doing well. And I think that is also very inspirational for a lot of women across Asia, because there aren't a lot of Asian female corporate executives or political leaders.
Okay. Now, in terms of international engagement, one of the unique initiatives that Modi government has done pretty well is in terms of not just economic engagement but also social engagement.
Right.
The foreign minister of India recently said India wants to be Vishwamitra, that's the friend of the world. And if you look at various initiatives such as climate change accord, vaccine diplomacy, and champion of the global south, do you think the world sees India as a Vishwamitra, that's friend of the world?
I know India is very keen to promote that idea, and I'm very familiar with the way it's trying to position itself as the champion of the global south. Now, the global south is such a big concept. What I can say is this: the Indian model of success has been thought-provoking and has been seen as a model for growth by many other countries worldwide, especially in emerging markets. And in that way, there is a lot of much to be learned from India. But at the same time, right now, when we see the governance, domestic governance in India, and we see the Modi government not really seeing diversity as strength, but trying to have a more narrowly defined definition of what it means to be Indian, that is concerning to the world. And that takes away from a lot of what India has achieved to date.
Okay, all right. Now, looking forward, what key challenges and opportunities do you foresee in India, and what would be your advice for any government that comes to power after this next election to cement its position in the global economic landscape?
Yeah. Well, first of all, again, domestic economic success is paramount. The ability for India to be able to bridge its own north-south divide, to create opportunities across the country, create opportunities not just for the majority population, but also provide opportunities and give respect to its minorities, that will be closely watched by the world. I think that right now, because the momentum is in India's favor, India has this opportunity to address those domestic challenges. If it's able to do that, then its ability to say that it is the champion of the global south rings much more as truth, that it will be seen as this model of a vibrant democracy, the region's largest democracy, that is serious about lifting all stakeholders. Again, Asia's success is this ability to think about national growth, that the success of a country is really dependent on a strong workforce, higher living standards for all. And I think that has been the success of Japan, of Taiwan, of Korea. Now it's gone across to Southeast and South Asia. We want that virtuous cycle to continue. One of the biggest challenges is going to be to get outside of the middle income trap. Another one is going to be able to tap into the changes in the supply chain management, so that countries that are resource rich aren't simply being exploited, that becomes their own tool to go up the value chain. India could provide some of these solutions to that. It's almost there, but it needs good policy to actually spring it forward.
Okay. Thank you very much for having such a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much.
Mohan. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.